Well, thank you for inviting us to join you tonight. As a botanist, it's always a treat to be able to spend time with the Native Plant Society and talk about plants. It's a rare opportunity for me, and it's really a pleasure. So, as Jan indicated, Andrew and I are part of the Environmental Bureau within the Department of Transportation. And the Environmental Bureau plays a very minor role when it comes to the broader mission of the Department of Transportation, which is to provide a safe and efficient transportation system for the state. But when it comes to the third part of our mission statement, which is preserving the environment of New Mexico, that responsibility falls firmly on our bureau, the Environmental Bureau. And that's a responsibility we take very seriously, and honestly, it's often extremely challenging, but it's also super fun and interesting. And the reason why is we get to work on so many cool projects and programs. For instance, we have a program dedicated to bat conservation on our bridges. We do prairie dog rescues before our projects go to construction so they don't get harmed by construction equipment. We create wetlands and beaver habitats. We have riparian restoration projects ongoing in the bosque of the Rio Grande using cottonwood pole cuttings like you see right here. We have a very active archaeology and historical preservation and research program. We also have a very active program in aesthetics, is what we call it. So in our aesthetics program, we work with local artists to develop artwork for a lot of our bridges and retaining walls throughout the state. And coming soon, we actually have a project with local artists to put sculptures and Route 66 themed architectural elements in some rest areas as part of the Route 66 Centennial celebration next year. So that's pretty exciting. And we also have a very robust wildlife conservation program in our bureau. And that program is primarily dedicated to trying to minimize wildlife vehicle collisions around the state. As you know, our highways intersect and fragment wildlife migration corridors. And so there's a lot of places where a lot of animals get killed by vehicles, which is very expensive, very dangerous for people. And I'm happy to announce that this year we got $50 million from the state legislature dedicated to designing and constructing what will be the state's first wildlife overpass. This is a computer rendering of what that would look like. It's going to be over Highway 550 north of Cuba in Sandoval County, which is one of our hot spots for wildlife vehicle collisions in the state. So, we've got all these cool things going on, but as a botanist, what's closest to my heart are our native plant and pollinator conservation projects. And that's what I came to talk about 7 years ago, was to introduce you to some of those native plant and pollinator projects that we have ongoing at the DOT. And during that talk, I focused on some of the improvements we were making to our native plant revegetation program, some of our roadside rare plant conservation projects, using native plants to reduce dust-related crashes. And at that point, our ambitions for starting an integrated vegetation management program, spoiler alert, now we have it, and this guy's running it. So he'll be talking to you later. Anyone know what this plant is, by the way? This is a rare plant up near Aztec, aptly named the Aztec Gilia. It's one of our state and federally listed threatened plants. Well, it's a Gilia, although I think actually the taxonomy now has been renamed something else yet again. But yeah, it's related to Ipomopsis. I forgot to put a label on that one, sorry. So today, it's my pleasure to come back to you 7 years later, and we're going to revisit some of those earlier topics. So I'm going to give you an update on the improvements we're making to our highway revegetation program. I'm going to give you an update to some of our rare plant conservation projects, in this case, involving the Mesa Verde cactus, which is an endangered species up in the Four Corners area. I'm going to give you an update on our habitat restoration and native plant seeding efforts to reduce dust-related crashes, primarily down on Interstate 10 near Lordsburg. And then I'm going to introduce you to some of our new initiatives, the Pollinator License Plate Program, the River for Monarchs Project, statewide rare plant surveys and mapping, and then I will turn things over to Andrew to talk about the new Integrated Vegetation Management Program. So lots to cover today. Before we jump into all that, let's just back up just a moment because I encounter a lot of confusion from people about what DOT actually does, what roads are we responsible for. Lots of people call me up and say, hey, you know, we've got a pothole out in front of our street, and it turns out, well, that's a city street. DOT doesn't do city streets, we don't do county roads, we don't do tribal roads. We do the state and federal highways in the state. So, you know, state highways are designated by the ZIA symbol. I think you've all seen that as you drive around. Federal highways have the black and white shields. And of course, the freeways are the red, white, and blue shields. So those are the roads that New Mexico DOT handles. And even though that's not all the roads in the state, it still adds up to 15,000 road miles. And if you consider that each of those roads have 50 to 100 feet of vegetated right-of-way on each side of them, that adds up to 488 square miles of vegetation that we're managing across the state. That's more land than is managed by state parks. It's more land than is managed by the Game and Fish Department and all their refuges. So it's a lot. People don't tend to think of us as a land management agency, but in effect we are. And that results in a high demand for revegetation following our highway construction projects. Annually, we're revegetating anywhere from 350 to 500 acres a year. It costs us about $13,000 per acre, and so we're spending $4.5 to $5 million a year just trying to get plants back out on the ground, which is so challenging here in New Mexico. Now you might be wondering, why is it so expensive to do revegetation? And one reason why is because we are really making a lot of improvements to our native plant revegetation program, trying to get as many plants back on the ground just to stabilize the soil and prevent erosion, but also for aesthetics and habitat values as well. And that costs a lot of money. So no longer are we just blowing and going with a hydro seeder, which doesn't tend to work very well here in New Mexico. In Oregon, that worked great. You know, you could do nothing and plants regrow over there with all the rain. But here we work really hard. So instead of just hydro seeding, we're investing a lot of money into preparing the soil as best we can. So we disc the soil, we till in compost and fertilizer, humates, mycorrhizae. Then we apply seeds with a seed drill that actually drills the seeds down into the soil for good seed to soil contact. Then over that, we're spreading and crimping straw and applying tackifier, just trying to keep those seeds from being eaten by birds or carried away by ants or washed away by water or blown away by wind. Everything we have basically here in New Mexico. And then on any steep slopes, we're actually doubling the seeding rate and we're applying rock mulch over the steep slopes. So, you know, no wonder it costs so much money. In addition, these are some new improvements that are actually going to be coming online this year. For areas that can't be drill seeded, maybe the slopes are too steep, or maybe the areas are too narrow, like behind guardrail where you can't get seed drill equipment back there, then we will allow hydroseeding, but they have to add what are called bioamendments that are made out of peat moss or seaweed to increase the organic matter in the mix, because that's been proven to really improve the seed establishment rates. Also, the compost that we're using, that we're tilling into the soil, that can no longer contain biosolids or sewage sludge, because those have been found to have high concentrations of PFAS or forever chemicals, and we don't want to be spreading those around in our environment. And so we're changing our suppliers for compost. And then many of you have probably seen the mulch socks that we put out for erosion control. For a long time, those had a polyethylene mesh around the outside. It turns out that stuff is practically a forever chemical. It doesn't biodegrade very well. So we're getting rid of those, and all our mulch socks now have to be made of natural biodegradable fibers. Usually that's cotton or jute. So also, we've made a lot of upgrades to our native seed mixes. So in the old days, there was a quote-unquote highway seed mix, and that included a lot of non-native species and some native species. We've gotten rid of that. Now we've replaced that with 6 different native seed mixes, each tailored to the different ecoregions in the state. This map here shows the 6 different ecoregions in New Mexico. So each one of those has its own customized seed mix. And each of those contains 8 to 10 native grasses, 8 to 10 native forbs, 3 to 5 native shrubs. We'd like to get even more wildflowers in it, but it's really hard to find commercial supplies of our native species. And oftentimes we can't even get the ones that we have on our list because there's just a handful of commercial seed vendors in the state. We can't just go down the seed plants of the Southwest and pick up a little baggie, right? We put out thousands of pounds of seed. And so those kind of supplies of native seeds are hard to come by. And we're competing with BLM and Forest Service and with FEMA for fire recovery efforts and things like that. So it's a tight market. They're hard to come by. Also, we've removed all the non-natives from our seed mixes except what's called it's a sterile annual wheat that comes up really fast as soon as there's any moisture, just to stabilize the soil, provide a little biomass that then dies back and lays down and acts as sort of like a nurse crop for our native species to come up. But it's annual, so it dies back, and it's sterile, so it can't reseed itself. So there's no risk of it sort of escaping or persisting on the site. And the other thing we've done is created a map of the 6 different seed zones, which you can find online if you just type in NMDOT revegetation zones or NMDOT seed maps. This is what it looks like. It's an interactive map, so you can zoom in, find where you're at, or if you're a contractor working on one of our projects, they can click on it and get the seed mix that they need to put down along with the seeding rates and everything like that. So speaking of seed mixes, now this is the interactive part of my talk. How many of you are familiar with Palmer's penstemon? Yeah, beautiful plant. That used to be part of our seed mix, and guess who took it out? Me. And now I'm wondering, should I have really done that? Let me explain why I did that. So Palmer's penstemon is like such an amazing plant. It grows everywhere we seed it, in places even we don't. Like you can see it coming up here in the crack in the concrete around the guardrail. It loves steep slopes with rocks. It's pretty, it smells nice, pollinators love it. Why would I take it out of the seed mix? And indeed, if you go to the USDA plants website, it shows that Palmer's penstemon is a native species. Why would we take a native species out of our seed mix? Here you can see it's firmly green there on the native range map for Palmer's penstemon. And then if you go to the SignNet website, are any of you familiar with this? It's a fantastic research tool. It's free for everyone to use. And they've got over 24 million plant records on here from around the country. It's a consortium of, I think, more than 11 herbaria. And they've basically digitized and scanned every herbarium sheet in those herbaria, and it's accessible on this website. So you can just type in, show me Palmer's penstemon collections, and it brings up this map. And it shows you, here's New Mexico. It shows that there are collections made from throughout New Mexico, as well as the rest of the Intermountain West. So surely it must be native to New Mexico, right? Well, one of the great things about this website is you can click on each of these occurrence dots, and it'll take you to the herbarium sheet with the original collection label. Guess what shows up on every collection label for this species? It was collected on a roadside, because we were seeding it on our roadsides for years. which makes me think this isn't native to New Mexico actually at all. It's just become naturalized where we seeded it. And in fact, it's more native, in Utah, Nevada, Arizona. But I kind of miss it. Yeah, I thought for sure it was native when I saw that SignNet website, and I was clicking on them. I'm like, wait a minute, these are all roads. Or a few of them weren't roads, they were like pathways or other areas. And I did some research, and it turned out like City of Santa Fe was using our seed mix uh, because they thought, well, that's DOT uses it, it must be good, right? Well, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that, because I think we are considering bringing that one back. But I didn't want to upset everyone at the Native Plant Society if it's like, oh, that's not really native. All right, I'm going to quickly switch topics now and give you an update on our rare plant conservation and mitigation program. We've got a project right now that involves the Mesa Verde cactus. Again, that's an endangered species up in the Four Corners area. And we're doing transplanting, seed banking, tissue culture, and population augmentation with this plant. And the reason why, we have a project that's reconstructing US 64 from the Arizona state line, which is right here, to Shiprock over here. It's a 23-mile stretch. It's all on Navajo Nation. And on that project, the purpose is to completely reconstruct that highway. The pavement is in really bad condition. It lacks the shoulders it needs for safety. A lot of the vertical and horizontal curves are not up to current safety standards and sight distances. The bridges are getting old, the culverts are failing, the railing isn't up to current standards. Basically, every aspect of this infrastructure is way overdue for replacement. And yeah, I mean, we do that all the time in this state. We reconstruct our highways. In this case, the part that's causing the conflict with the Mesa Verde cacti are the bridge replacement components of the project. If you think about it, how do you replace this bridge? Can you just tear this bridge down and then put the new bridge back right where that bridge was? No, because you'd have to close the highway, and there's no detours out here in this part of the Navajo Nation. So you would be cutting huge numbers of people off from essential services if you don't figure out a way to keep things open, right, during construction. So typically what we do in these cases is we'll build the new bridge either off to the left side or off to the right side, sometimes slightly overlapping the existing bridge so that you can keep one lane open for alternating travel during construction, so you're not completely closing the highway. But in this case, you have Mesa Verde cactus, in this case 59 of them growing on both sides. So there's no way to replace this bridge without impacting some of the cacti. We managed to avoid 53 of them, but 7 of them are just unavoidable. So what do we do? By the way, you can see Shiprock there in the background. Well, since it's an endangered species, we had to consult with Navajo Department of Fish and Wildlife, because we're on Navajo land, and also with the US Fish and Wildlife Service, just to be in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. And we worked with them to come up with a plan. And part of that plan involves transplanting those 7 cacti out of harm's way into some other suitable habitat that's nearby, but outside the project limits. Unfortunately, all the previous transplants that have been done, I shouldn't say all of them, but it's fairly well recognized that this cactus doesn't like to be transplanted, which is odd. I don't know why, because it seems like a lot of cacti can take transplanting just fine, handle a lot of abuse. Maybe that's why this one is so rare. It's delicate. So we don't know if this is going to be successful, but we start out by tying a little ribbon, isn't that cute, onto the cactus. Do you know why we do this? In this case, we're marking the north side of the plant. And that way, when we dig the plant up from where it was naturally growing, we can put it back so that it's still, the right side of the cactus is still facing north, so that we're not changing the sort of orientation or aspect. I guess that's supposed to help cacti. I mean, we talked to some cactus experts. That was what they recommended we do. So this happened just this March. We transplanted the cactus. Again, there's Shiprock in the background. We're going to be monitoring these for, I think, 5 years. So maybe I'll come back in 5 years and tell you how this worked. But because the prospects are a little gloomy for the success, Navajo Department of Fish and Wildlife wanted us to do more. And so what we've done is we're partnering with the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix. Have any of you ever been there? Fantastic cactus exhibits there. But behind the scenes, they also have some state-of-the-art tissue culture facilities and several staff who are very talented in that respect. And so we are contracting with them to do seed collection and banking, tissue culture, and then population augmentation. I'll walk you through this real quickly. We're currently at step 1, collecting seeds from the wild populations. So the staff from the Cactus Desert Botanic Garden went out, collected seeds, I think just last week. Some of those are going to go into permanent, like cryogenic storage for long-term banking, but the others are going to be used to start a tissue culture propagation program. And what that involves is you germinate the seeds in the lab, which is step 2. Then you use that material, you somehow divide it, I don't know, they do some sort of witchcraft, but they can multiply that into over 100 clones just using a few seedlings. And then they'll cultivate those in pots for 4 to 5 years until they get to a mature age and structure where we can then try to return them back to the wild. So yeah, on the one hand, you're getting kind of lower genetic diversity because you're cloning just a few individuals. But when you're dealing with a plant this rare, you don't want to use all of its seeds and grab them from the native population and do it. This allows us to kind of just get more with less, basically. These are some pictures not involving the Mesa Verde cactus, but from another rare cactus, Clover's cactus. This just shows the kind of micro-propagation technique. It's grown in a sterile environment on this growth medium. Then they get transplanted into pots. Those in turn, as they get bigger, will be transplanted into their own pots. And then, yeah, hopefully 5 years later, we'll be putting them back out on the ground. So many of you are probably familiar with some of the dust problems we have in the southern part of the state. It's quite severe in some years, and it's also extremely expensive and extremely dangerous. So every time they close I-10 between Las Cruces and the Arizona state line, it costs millions of dollars in lost economic productivity because there's a lot of freight travel on this route. And when you close I-10, the detour is 110 miles long. So that's a big concern. But even more of a concern is how dangerous this is. So 46 fatalities in the last 37 years, including 3 this year. And actually, sadly, I have to update that number. It's now 4 because there was a fatality last week when those monsoon storms blew in. So, DOT has been challenged by this. What can we do about these big dust storms? Well, traditionally, not much. We've just thought, well, let's try to educate drivers what to do when a dust storm comes. So there's a lot of education signs about getting off the roadways, turning off your lights so that other cars behind you don't follow you. It's just trying to deal with, the human behavior after the event occurs. But wouldn't it be great if there was something we could do to stop the dust at its source? And that really is the solution. The solution is to stabilize those dust sources, which are mostly coming from grazed and eroded playas in the surrounding uplands next to Interstate 10, next to the interstate. But the challenge for us is DOT doesn't own that land. Who owns that land? I don't know if you can see in this picture, but here's the interstate. Everything that's yellow, sorry this doesn't show up well, but almost everything there is yellow. That's Bureau of Land Management. Everything that's blue is the state land office, and then there's just a few privately owned parcels, but virtually all of this is public land. So as the DOT, what we've been trying to do is get landowner agreements in place where we're saying, if you let us out there, we'll spend our money, we'll try to do something. And we've had limited success getting that going, mostly with the state land office. In places where the state land office and their ranch leasing holders agreed to it, our goals have been to manage grazing to reduce the soil disturbance, restore natural surface hydrology, arrest the sediment input from degraded uplands. So what's happening is a lot of the sediment in the uplands, through loss of vegetation from livestock grazing, it's washing down onto the playas and it's eroding things as it goes. You're getting a lot of rilling and gullying. All that sediment gets transported out onto the playas, where then the wind can pick it up and blow it across the interstate. So we're trying to arrest some of that sediment input and then just generally revegetate and stabilize barren ground. And the way we're doing this, we're using FHWA safety funds, and we've hired 4 different contractors listed here: Stream Dynamics, Tooley's Trees, and Keyline Design. Many of you probably know Gordon Tooley from the Truchas area. So he's been helping us. High Desert Native Plants and Bar Engineering. So these 4 companies have been doing a lot of great work for us. And what they've done in the last few years, they've installed and repaired over 5 miles of livestock fences. They've built 983 machine and hand-built rock erosion control structures like Zuni bowls, Media Lunas, One Rock dams. And they've removed multiple levees and berms to restore the natural hydrology out there. And they've seeded almost 2,000 acres with what we're calling the KISS treatment, which is key lining, imprinting, and seeding. And this is what that equipment looks like. So you have a tractor. It's pulling right behind it. That's the keyline plow, which has these long, thin blades that make slices deep into the soil. As you can see here, those are made along the contours of the ground. And what that does is it helps retain any precipitation and moisture that comes to the ground. Instead of it sheet flowing off, it soaks into those little slices and it's held on the site, and it's more available for plants. Behind the keyline plow is a broadcast seeder, that red object there, and then behind that is this heavy imprinting wheel that creates a series of divots on the ground, much like the dimples on the surface of a golf ball. And each of those little divots is a microsite of water harvesting. It creates eddy currents with the wind, so it brings in organic material, and it's just like a microsite for seed germination, basically. And over the years, we've put down nearly 40,000 pounds of native seed out there, consisting of 24 different native species, which are listed here. And the results in places are dramatic, where you go from utterly bare ground to quick vegetation cover, although even here it's largely dependent upon precipitation from year to year. But those imprinting little wells help keep the moisture there where the plants can use it. So you can see this is called 6 weeks grama. Some of you might be familiar with that, kind of an annual week perennial grama grass. And you can see it's coming up in the pattern of where it was seeded. Just out of curiosity, though, when I saw this picture, I'm like, what the devil is this thing? I thought, surely that's a poppy, right? But then I was looking at it, and it has these pinnately compound leaves, spreading stems. This was a head scratcher for me. I finally keyed it out and figured out what it was, but anyone know this plant by chance? Yeah, my botany isn't that great in this part of the state, but I thought I would share with you my revelation. It's called Calstramia grandiflora, or the Arizona poppy or Arizona caltrop. And it's in the caltrop family, which is the Zygophalaceae, which interestingly is the same as goat heads and creosote bush. And if you look at it, you do see, it does look like a goat head, kind of, doesn't it? But much, much nicer, and not with those thorny fruits on it. So at this point, there's still a lot left to be done to reduce dust down there, to improve traffic safety. At this point, it's largely out of DOT hands because we don't own the land. What we're pinning most of our hopes on right now is that we, as the DOT, with FHWA support, have nominated this area as an area of critical environmental concern, or ACEC, which is a BLM land designation. And we're hoping that with that nomination, they'll have maybe the political pressure to change the land use out here from grazing and maybe more of an emphasis on public safety and just the preservation of the unique playa area in general. It's a very unique habitat, right? So fingers crossed, maybe the BLM will do something like that. Already they are seeming to shift their position a little bit. We see them, sounds like maybe they're going to start undertaking some of their own projects to restore some of this land. So really hopeful that that does indeed occur. All right, quickly I'm going to tell you about some new initiatives that we're working on. Did you all know we have a pollinator license plate? Yeah, it's too bad that the Motor Vehicles Department doesn't advertise this a little more, but there is one, and I would encourage you all to go out and get it. This came about with Senate Bill 234, passed in 2019, sponsored by the Wild Friends of New Mexico, and students from around the state submitted their designs, and I was on the committee that got to review those, and some of them were so sweet. But the one that got the winning vote was the image you see here of the blanket flower and the sweat bee, which sadly kind of blends in with the yellow of the license plate. But so far we've generated $13,000 from those license plate sales, which, you know, it's not a lot of money, but we are going to use that $13,000 to buy more wildflower seeds and put them out on our highways. So that's kind of fun. We're also participating in what's called the River for Monarchs project. This is a project that's being spearheaded by the Institute for Applied Ecology out of Santa Fe, but it has a lot of partners and collaborators, in which the DOT is one of them. And what this project will do is create 16 what we're calling stepping stone habitats for monarchs and other pollinators across the 200-mile migration corridor along the Rio Grande. And the DOT is supplying 2 of those 16 stepping stone sites. And what the Institute of Applied Ecology is doing, they're going out and collecting seeds from wild populations to begin large-scale nursery production of milkweeds and other forbs. The milkweeds, as you know, are the larval host plant of the monarch butterflies. And the nursery production is being performed by an interesting mix of partners. Sandia High School, so students are actively growing those plants, I think, right now. The Penitentiary of New Mexico and the Pueblo of Santa Ana. This is a picture of one of our 2 sites that the DOT is providing, called the Rio Chama site. It's just north of Espanola, near the confluence of the Rio Grande and the Rio Chama. Last year in 2024, Institute for Applied Ecology seeded 27 pounds of native annual and perennial forbs on our site and planted over 13,000 nursery-grown plugs, including 3 species of milkweed, the showy milkweed, the broadleaf milkweed, and the horsetail milkweed, as well as 5 other forbs were planted out there. And then this year at our Los Lunas site near Highway 6, they will be seeding and planting that site this year. So that's an interesting project that we get to partner with. And then lastly, for decades, we've known we've had some rare plants along the state highway rights-of-way, but we didn't know what they were or where they were at. We didn't have good records. The records we had were old, and we didn't know if what the status of those populations were. And so finally in 2022 and 2023, we received some federal funds to partner with Tetra Tech, which is a consulting firm here in New Mexico, to send teams of botanists out across the state and find out and document what do we really have along our highways. So this was a dream come true for me. I've been wanting this for a long time. And the way they went about this is are you all familiar with the Natural Heritage New Mexico database? They have records of all the rare plants and animals around the state, and they're sort of the caretakers of that data. So like anytime we or really any other agency like finds a rare plant population, we give the GIS information to Natural Heritage New Mexico, and they're sort of the clearinghouse for that information. So our consultants accessed their database and looked at all the records known for the 29 federally and state listed plant species. And then they used GIS to filter that data for which of those records overlap with state highways. And once they did that, they separated those records into 7 clusters that you can see here on this map to go out and then survey for those species, basically ground truth the records, which are still there, which have disappeared over time, and also perform new inventories in suitable habitats to see what might be out there that wasn't previously recorded. And the result was that they found 16 different listed species in our rights-of-way at 230 different occurrences, which they identified and mapped. Right now, I'm just going to blitz through some quick pictures of the ones they found because I want to make sure that I give Andrew time to talk. So this will be fast, but we found Aztec gilia, Clover's cactus, which is state endangered, Mesa Verde cactus, the Zuni fleabane, the Great Plains lady's tresses. I really want to see this one. The Mimbris figwort, Sacramento prickly poppy, the Sacramento Mountains thistle, Kunzler's cactus, the Chihuahua scurf pea, almost said Chiricahua, Chihuahua scurf pea, Pecos sunflower, Shear's pincushion cactus, the Santa Fe cholla, which is just state listed, Wright's marsh thistle, the night blooming Sirius cactus, and lastly, the gypsum's wild buckwheat. So the next steps, now that we know what we've got and where it's at, we can now start protecting and managing those rare plant populations as part of our integrated vegetation management program, which brings me to Andrew. So Andrew, I'll pass the baton to you. In the meantime, if any of you ever want to contact me, this is my contact information, email, phone. You can come visit me at our general office in Santa Fe, up on the 2nd floor. Any questions for me before I pass things off to Andrew? All right, Andrew.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Andrew Alderete. I am the Integrated Vegetation Management Specialist with NMDOT within the Environmental Bureau and Roadside Design section. So first of all, Integrated Vegetation Management, what is it? Well, it's a coordinated decision-making process, meaning coordinating within our own agency with maintenance, construction, coordinating with other government agencies, federal, state, local, as Steve mentioned earlier, and getting together with them with making the most effective getting the most effective methods and strategies while monitoring and evaluating. So as Steve mentioned earlier, here's a map of the state and kind of give you an idea of all of the different roadways that we manage. So we manage approximately 215,000 acres along 15,000 miles of right-of-way from the Chihuahuan Desert to alpine elevations. Most of the right-of-way is on easements, meaning that we don't have right-of-way. It belongs to either BLM, Forest Service, and we would have to have an agreement with them or some sort of coordination with them before we do any type of activities in those areas. Most of the right-of-way is left in natural condition. A narrow portion of it is managed for safety, sight lines, fire suppression, drainage, etc. I'll get into a little more of that later on what else it covers. The right-of-way acts as a bioreserve for native plants and is a migration corridor as well. So this was one of the first efforts of the IVM program within DOT was to develop a best management practices document, which is what you have here. This is basically just the cover, but you can access it through the website, which I'll get into a little bit later. So basically what this document does is to aid our maintenance personnel into developing the proper vegetation management practices as it pertains to, being regulatory compliant within federal laws, state laws, local laws, things of that nature. It also helps, it's also an effort to try and help increase safety throughout the roadway. So you guys have probably noticed that, there's a lot of areas where a lot of guardrail is covered with trees or vegetation. Signs may be encroached by vegetation. So that's what I mean by safety. We want to make sure that these areas get cleaned up so that way everybody can see them, they're visible, which is the whole point, is to make sure those structures are visible. Protecting our roadways and bridges. There's a lot of instances where we have Siberian elms, Russian olives, salt cedars growing into our bridge abutments and our roadways, drainage structures, things like that, which is I'm working with maintenance to try and prioritize these areas so that way they can get them cleared. Protect existing habitat and restore others as necessary. So like pollinator habitats, areas where there's a lot of erosion, a lot of rilling, things of that nature, kind of gives us the idea of where revegetation, where we can have revegetation projects kind of fix those areas. Yeah. So we divided up, I divided up the right-of-way into zones. Of course, this doesn't always apply because our right-of-way varies in certain areas. There's areas where it could be 5, 10 feet. There's other areas where it can be 30 or 50 feet, or even 100 feet in some cases. So the most managed zone here would be zone 1. And you're all probably aware that that mow swath that takes place right adjacent to the roadway, that single swath is about 15 feet. So that's going to continue to happen throughout the state. Now, where we're looking to kind of reduce mowing is in zones 2 and 3, unless there's certain structures there, for example, like snow fence, things of that nature. So at the end of the year, so previously they were cutting, all the way to the fence line in these areas. Well, I put a stop to that because, well, you know what? A lot of these areas where they're just cutting all the way down, the grasses don't seem to be growing back very well. So if they were to just let it grow throughout the growing season, make that their last cut of the season when they come around to it, because, they need that snow fence to work, would be ideal, because then that gives the grasses, the forbs, and all of the vegetation in that area time to reestablish itself. And so zone 1's considered the positive drainage zone. Zone 2 is your operational zone. You'll have grasses and some forbs in there. And then your zone 3 is your transition zone. So more often than not, that you've probably noticed throughout the state, that the right-of-way looks a lot better than what's on the other side of the fence. So it probably doesn't apply too well in those places. But in areas like out here, where there's more trees, there's more vegetation on the roadway, it helps us to blend everything back into the native habitat. Are waters protected along highways? Well, currently they're going to be. We just finished mapping out restricted spray zones throughout the state that pertains to what's defined as a relatively permanent waters, which is kind of a sketchy definition to begin with, but it's going to require some field verification. We had a consultant help us map all of these areas out, to which I'm going to go out and now I'm going to mark the areas with buffer zones, so that way when maintenance goes out and does any type of herbicide spraying or anything like that, I'll have the buffer zones marked to protect these waterways and also the native plants and rare plants that are along our roadways. So this is basically everything that we have mapped out, rivers, creeks, canals, wetlands, ponds, and lakes, jurisdictional waters, and acequias. Restricted spray zones create a best management practices to better protect these natural resources, which I'm in the process of doing. Rare, threatened, and endangered plants and animals as well will be marked. And relatively permanent waters, which is the definition for all the protected waters in the state. How do we protect the roadside environment? So here's a picture of some natural pollinator habitat along a portion of New Mexico 12 near Aragon. And the way we want to go about this is reduce mowing in these areas, not take mowing out completely, because we know mowing can have beneficial aspects to it. Reduce herbicide use, of course. We want to make sure that these plants go, and the insects that rely on them go through their proper life cycles before maintenance comes and cuts them down. Revegetate wherever needed, any places where bare soil is visible. Remove hazardous and non-native trees. Establish restricted spray zones, which I talked a little bit about earlier, and establish pollinator habitat, and to protect sensitive resources. Integrated vegetation management activities. So I currently have some tree clearing projects going on throughout the state. Basically, what these projects consist of is it's a coordination with state forestry and helping them to create fire breaks, things of that nature, and getting those. And then that helps us because it clears these roadways of obstacles where there's lots of wildlife crossings. It opens up the roadway to be able to thaw more accurately when we have snow events and ice forms on the road. So it really does help a lot with making the roadway safer. Mapping. Currently, one of the first mapping efforts that we did was to map all of the different maintenance activities that take place throughout the state. The mowing, how many times do they mow in the area? Herbicide application, what type of herbicide applications do they do? Where do they do them? Stuff like that. So that's all part of a database right now, and it's been collected through all 82 patrols throughout the state. Noxious weeds, this was also another project that we've just finished. We mapped out noxious weeds in districts 3 and 6, which coming shortly, hopefully before the end of the year, we can get the other 4 districts mapped out. And now what we did there was we used a noxious weed database, I believe from US Forest Service, and we used that as our main key to see where portions of our roadway cross into these areas and if we have those particular noxious weeds within our right-of-way. So right now, in those 2 districts, the noxious weed mapping is specific to the right-of-way. Rare plant species, as Steve mentioned earlier, we got the rare plant species mapped out on our right-of-way. Restricted spray zones as well. We have mapped out, and I'm getting ready to go out and map personally and verify these areas. And roadway agreements. So roadway agreements is a new one that we just started. So there are portions of our roadway that get designated to other entities. Like for example, maybe the village of Taos wanted to say take care of a portion of roadway. Well, that we would have to get into an agreement, and then we would have to give that portion of roadway over to that town that wants to maintain it. And basically what that does is, okay, we give it over for them to maintain, but if at any point it doesn't get maintained anymore, then we can come in and take it back over and do the maintenance in that area. Vegetation management plans for all 82 maintenance patrols statewide. So like I said, we only got districts 3 and 6 done right now, but we want to do that nationwide. And protect and expand all pollinator habitats as well. So basically putting pollinator habitats in areas with agricultural significance, perhaps maybe even bringing some beneficial pollinator insects to those areas with these pollinator habitats. So when we did our rare plant mapping, this is that map that Steve was talking about earlier from, it was the Natural Heritage Program. So this was the baseline for figuring out where we had rare plants. So any area that's located on this map with these polygons crossed a section of roadway, then we would verify if there were any rare plants in those sections. Um, yep. So why rare plants are protected along highways? So federal endangered in species. The Federal Endangered Species Act applies to highways crossing federal lands. The Endangered Species Act applies to FHWA funded highway construction projects as well. State and federally listed both protected, and state listed requires consultation with Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, Erica Rowe, who is the state botanist. So like Steve was talking about earlier with the cactus that they had to remove from a construction site, which is who we would have to consult with, right, to get that stuff done.
Yeah, actually, that was on tribal lands, which is about the only lands that the new state Endangered Species Act for plants doesn't apply to. So Energy and Minerals Department, Erica's program, I don't know if you're familiar with this, just a couple of years ago, they got that law passed to create, the state law for threatened endangered plants. And it applies both to state lands, federal lands, and private lands, which is kind of unprecedented in the nation, actually. So we now have one of the strongest laws in the nation for state-listed plants, but it doesn't apply to tribal lands. So for the Mesa Verde cactus example I gave you, we didn't consult with them, although we did. I mean, I told her what was going on, but they don't have any jurisdiction over it.
So the Gila management plan, so this is a plan that was brought to our attention in June of 2023. The Gila Native Plant Society, the Southwestern Audubon Society, and the Heart of the Gila reached out to the Department of Transportation and U.S. Forest Service. So some of these are a few of the concerns that there were, was to identify targeted invasive weeds, potential relocation for stockpiled materials near streams. Now at this time, they had some stockpiles up for chip sealing the road, and they ended up having to stay there longer than they typically do because when they got the stockpiles there, the weather came and it didn't allow them to do any work, so they had to leave those piles there. But it was the location of some of these piles that were the concern. Drainage improvements, identify areas needing revegetation, manage uncontrolled access points, which is this here. So there's in this particular area, if it's not marked with the number, then it's considered an unauthorized access. Map and protect rare plants, and identify hazard trees, like this one here, kind of leaning towards the roadway. So here's a map of what was surveyed. So this stretch of New Mexico 15 that goes from Silver City to the Gila Cliff Dwellings was surveyed. And in this area is where most of the hazard trees were at and where some of the rare plants were located. In through here, New Mexico 35 from its junction with 152 right here was surveyed. And then from Emery Pass to its junction with New Mexico 35, what was surveyed as well. And there was a lot of gumweed found in here, New Mexico gumweed, which is considered an important plant in these areas. So this is still ongoing. We're still looking through it. We're still making sure the wording and all of the stuff and the information is correct on the report, and that all the people who need to review it get to review it before it gets finalized. So public and agency outreach for this program I have found is very important. Coming to events like this and explaining to people what's happening with our programs. Public review of the NMDOT best management practices, that happened when that came out. So it was helpful to get some public info on that. Introduce integrated vegetation management through non-government organizations. work with cooperative weed management areas, which I work with the Taos County CWMA quite frequently, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Areas through soil and water conservation districts, and NMDOT website. So if you were to go to www.dot.gov and type in IVM in the search engine on that web page, and it'll take you to the IVM web page. Or you can type NMDOT IVM on your normal search engine, and then it'll also bring it up that way. And consultation with New Mexico Department of Agriculture, State Forestry, BLM, U.S. Forest Service, and all the other agencies that weren't mentioned here, we collaborate with. So why? What's the whole reason for all this? Well, savings in revenue is a big one, but another one that I didn't really mention here was aesthetics. Well, I guess I did there at the bottom, excuse me. But yeah, so one of the big things is working with the districts, helping them develop plans that are more efficient, more cost effective, rather than going out and filling up a big 3,000 gallon tank with herbicides. Let's more strategically target these species with not so much of a broadcast, but a more targeted approach. That's a good way to start saving there. And reduce mowing where it's not necessary. In a lot of these areas where they mow all the way to the fence line isn't really necessary. I know it gives it that nicer look, and it kind of, some people will probably see it as an eyesore after a while, but I just want them to understand that it's being done for a purpose. It's not like it's never going to get mowed, but we want to make sure that vegetation comes in at least efficient enough to where we can go and mow it a little more if necessary. Change treatment methods, yeah, so these management plans, so in a lot of cases, a lot of the same chemicals get used on the same species of noxious weeds, which in turn, they develop tolerances to it. So being able to change that approach every year is going to be very important. And improved aesthetics, the nicer your roadways look, the more tourists will attract, right? That's the thing, a lot of our roadways are really dry and dull looking, and if there's even vegetation on them at all, so we're hoping with this program we can start making a difference with that throughout the state. So, and well, that concludes my presentation for the IVM program. Being able to work with everybody, work with all of the different agencies to get this done. Being able to work within our own agency to be able to get certain things done, which, is a challenge at times as well. You'd think, oh, well, it's DOT, you can, it's easier said than done, let's just put it that way. So, thank you.
Thank you.